My ex-wife abandoned us for 7 years, then demanded to pick up where we left off as if nothing had happened, and then My name is Ryan Taylor. I'm 33 years old, a father of two amazing kids, and until about 7 years ago, I thought I had my life all figured out. I grew up in Denver, Colorado, where I met my high school sweetheart, Sophia. She was everything to me back then. My first love, my first everything. We got married straight out of high school, full of those youthful dreams that make you think you can conquer anything together. At first, life was good. We didn't have much, but we had each other, and for a while, that was enough. We started our family young. Mason came first, and a few years later, we welcomed Lila. I thought we were building something solid, something that could withstand anything. Sophia always had a taste for the finer things. I used to think it was one of her quirks, something that made her who she was. She loved decorating the house with stylish pieces she found online, putting together outfits that made her stand out. I figured she just wanted the best for us, and I didn't think too much about it. But over time, that desire for the best started to shift into something else. It started small, an expensive purse here, a shopping spree there. I brushed it off as her wanting to treat herself. Then came the high-end stroller for Mason, the designer clothes for Lila, and the relentless push to upgrade everything we owned. Every month, I'd look at the credit card bills and wonder how we were going to make it to the next paycheck. I told myself it was just a phase, that she'd grow out of it, or that maybe this was her way of coping with the challenges of raising two kids. But it wasn't just a phase. Sophia began hanging out with this group of moms from Mason's school. They were the kind of women who always looked like they just stepped out of a fashion magazine. They drove luxury SUVs, threw elaborate parties for their kids, and talked about vacations in places I couldn't even pronounce. Sophia started spending more time with them, going out for brunches, shopping trips, and girls' weekends that didn't seem to end. At first, I was glad she was making friends. Parenting can be isolating, and I figured it was good for her to have a support system. But then it became clear that these weren't just friends. They were her new standard of living. She started comparing everything we had to what they had, and suddenly, nothing we owned was good enough. "We need a bigger house," she'd say. "Mason can't have a birthday party here. It's embarrassing." Or, "Why don't we ever go on vacation? The Andersons are taking their kids to Hawaii. Don't you want us to have a better life?" I wanted to give her the world. I wanted to give my kids the best, too. But I also wanted to keep the lights on and food on the table. Every time I tried to talk to her about cutting back, it turned into a fight. "You don't understand," she'd snap. "I'm doing this for us. You don't get what it's like to be a mom these days. People judge you." It wasn't just the spending that got to me. It was the way she changed. Sophia started to care more about keeping up appearances than about us. She stopped joining us for family dinners, always rushing off to meet someone or go somewhere. Even when she was home, it felt like she wasn't really there. I worked long shifts at a local factory, often clocking 10 or 12 hours just to cover our growing expenses. I'd come home exhausted, hoping to find some peace, but instead, there'd be another shopping bag on the counter or another package at the door. It was like trying to bail water out of a sinking boat, and every time I thought I was getting somewhere, another hole would appear. One night, I finally reached my breaking point. I sat Sophia down and laid everything out. I told her we couldn't keep living like this, that we were one missed paycheck away from losing everything. I begged her to see reason, to cut back, to focus on what really mattered. But she just rolled her eyes and said, "You're being dramatic. Don't you want your family to have nice things?" I wanted to scream. Of course, I wanted my family to have nice things, but I also wanted to sleep at night without worrying about the rent. I wanted to build a future for Mason and Lila that didn't involve debt collectors at the door. Then came the night that changed everything. I woke up around 2 in the morning and noticed Sophia wasn't in bed. At first, I thought maybe she was downstairs getting a drink or checking on the kids. But when I got up to look for her, the house was eerily quiet. No lights, no sound, just me, standing in the dark. That's when I saw it. A piece of paper folded neatly on her pillow. My heart sank as I picked it up and unfolded it. The first line hit me like a punch to the gut. "Ryan, I need to do this for me." She wrote about how she felt trapped, how I was holding her back, and how she needed to find herself. She mentioned some guy she'd met, someone who could show her the life she'd always dreamed of. And then, at the bottom of the note, the line that haunts me to this day. I'll be back in a few years. By then, I'll have experienced everything I've ever wanted, and we can pick up where we left off. I sat there, staring at the words, my hands trembling. She was gone. She'd left me, left Mason and Lila. For what? Some fantasy? Some dream? I tried calling her, but her phone went straight to voicemail. I called again and again, but it was like she'd vanished into thin air. When Mason woke up the next morning, he found me sitting at the kitchen table with the note in front of me. He looked at me with those big, confused eyes and asked, "Where's Mom? Did something happen to her?" I didn't know what to say. How do you tell your kids that their mother chose to walk away? She's going away for a while, I stammered. But we're going to be okay. I promise. In that moment, something inside me shifted. I couldn't rely on Sophia anymore. She'd made her choice, and now it was up to me to hold our family together. The days that followed were a blur of emotions: anger, sadness, confusion. But through it all, one thing became clear. I had to figure out how to move forward. For Mason, for Lila, for myself. And so, the life I thought I'd built with Sophia came crashing down, and I was left to pick up the pieces. The morning after Sophia left, I sat at the kitchen table, staring at her note for what felt like hours. Mason and Lila were still asleep upstairs, and the silence in the house was deafening. The life we had built, or what I thought we had built, was gone, shattered by her decision to walk away. I had no time to dwell on the hurt. Mason and Lila were about to wake up, and they needed me to be strong, even if I felt like I was falling apart inside. The first few days were the hardest. Explaining Sophia's absence to the kids without making her sound like the villain was a delicate balancing act I wasn't prepared for. Mason kept asking why she had to leave, and Lila, only 9 at the time, was convinced her mom had gone somewhere fun and would be back soon. I couldn't bring myself to tell them the truth. Not yet. She's taking some time away, I told them as gently as I could. But I'm here, and we're going to be okay. It felt like a lie, even though I wanted it to be true. Money was the first challenge. Sophia had drained our savings with her spending habits, and I was left scrambling to cover the basics. Rent was due in less than 2 weeks, and I barely had enough to get by. I started calling the utility companies to see if I could get extensions on our bills. At the same time, I began selling anything we didn't absolutely need. An espresso machine Sophia had insisted on buying, a treadmill that was collecting dust, and a closet full of clothes with designer tags still attached. Every little bit helped, but it wasn't enough. I went to my boss, Mr. Reed, and explained my situation. I'll never forget the look on his face as I told him what had happened. He didn't say much, just nodded and told me to take whatever overtime shifts I needed. That was the break I desperately needed. I picked up as many extra hours as I could, working late into the night and on weekends. When I wasn't at the factory, I started freelancing as a mechanic, fixing cars in the evenings for neighbors and friends. It was exhausting, but there was no other option. I had 2 kids who needed me, and I wasn't going to let them down. The house became a battlefield of responsibilities. Every morning, I was up before dawn, packing lunches, helping Mason with his math homework, and braiding Lila's hair before school. After work, I'd rush home to cook dinner, clean up, and get the kids to bed. By the time they were asleep, I was too tired to do anything but collapse onto the couch. Some nights, though, sleep didn't come. I'd lie awake, staring at the ceiling, replaying the last few months in my head. Could I have done something differently? Had I missed the signs? The questions were endless, and the answers were never satisfying. I leaned on a few people during those first months, mostly coworkers and a friend named Grace who lived in the neighborhood. Grace was a single mom herself, raising her 2 boys after her husband had walked out. She understood the chaos and the guilt, the feeling that no matter how much you did, it would never be enough. Take it one day at a time, she told me during one of our late-night chats. You're doing more than most people would, and your kids see that. They know you're trying. Her words helped, even if I didn't always believe them. Mason and Lila were stronger than I gave them credit for. Mason, at 13, took on a protective role, helping with chores and keeping an eye on his sister. Lila had a harder time adjusting. She'd cry herself to sleep some nights, clutching a stuffed animal Sophia had given her on her last birthday. Those nights were the worst. I'd sit on the edge of her bed, rubbing her back and telling her it was okay to miss her mom. "Do you think she's happy where she is?" she asked me once, her voice barely a whisper. "I don't know, sweetheart," I said honestly. "But I know she loves you, and she'd want you to be happy too." That felt like the right thing to say, but it tasted bitter in my mouth. As the weeks turned into months, I started to find my rhythm. The routine was grueling but manageable. I cut out anything unnecessary from our budget. Cable, subscriptions, and takeout meals were the first to go. Instead of eating out, I learned how to cook simple, affordable meals. The kids and I started making weekly trips to the park or having movie nights at home with popcorn and dollar store candy. It wasn't perfect, but it was ours. One night, about 6 months after Sophia left, Mason came into my room holding a picture of her. It was from our wedding day, back when we were both so young and full of hope. He sat on the bed and handed it to me. "Do you think she'll ever come back?" he asked, his voice steady but full of uncertainty. I stared at the photo, remembering the girl I'd fallen in love with. She was smiling so brightly, so confidently, like she knew exactly where life would take us. But that girl didn't exist anymore, not in the way I remembered her. "I don't know," I said, my voice thick with emotion. "But no matter what happens, we're going to be okay. I promise you that." Over time, the kids and I began to rebuild our lives, piece by piece. The nights weren't as lonely, and the mornings weren't as rushed. Mason and Lila started to adjust to the new normal, even if it wasn't the life we had planned. They laughed more, smiled more, and gave me hope when I felt like giving up. I'd like to say that I stopped thinking about Sophia, but that wouldn't be true. There were still moments when her absence hit me like a ton of bricks. At school events where other moms showed up with cupcakes, at holidays when Mason and Lila asked if we'd send her a card. But those moments became fewer and farther between. By the end of that first year, I realized something important. I didn't need Sophia to make our family whole. We were doing just fine without her, maybe even better in some ways. I wasn't just surviving anymore. I was learning how to thrive, one small step at a time. The kids and I were a team now, and nothing was going to tear us apart. By the time we hit the 2-year mark without Sophia, the dust had started to settle. Life wasn't easy, but it had become manageable. The chaos she left behind was no longer the defining feature of our days. It was a slow, grueling climb, but we were finally seeing the top of the mountain. Mason was 15 by then, and turning into a remarkable young man. He had grown taller than me, which he loved to point out whenever he got the chance. He was thoughtful, responsible, and always looking out for Lila. She was 11 and still had the softness of a child, but with a spark in her eyes that showed how much she'd grown, too. They were my reason for pushing forward. Our little 2-bedroom house on the edge of Fort Collins had become our safe haven. It wasn't much, a simple home with creaky floors and a yard that needed constant work, but it was ours. Moving out of Denver had been the right choice. We needed a fresh start, and this quiet town gave us room to breathe. Looking back, I realized that leaving the house Sophia and I had shared was one of the best decisions I could have made. It was filled with too many ghosts, too many memories that weighed me down. The move was tough, especially on Mason and Lila, but it marked the beginning of something new. I had started to rebuild our finances, slowly but surely. The overtime shifts and freelance mechanic work were paying off. For the first time in years, I wasn't constantly worried about making rent or keeping the lights on. I even managed to start a small emergency fund, a far cry from the financial mess Sophia left behind. But it wasn't just about money. It was about regaining a sense of control. I was no longer waking up to surprise credit card bills or dealing with packages arriving at the door. The absence of chaos was a blessing I didn't fully appreciate until it was gone. Then there was Emily Harper. We met by chance, as most good things in life tend to happen. It was a quiet Saturday afternoon, and I had taken Mason and Lila to a small bookstore in town. Mason was looking for a new graphic novel, and Lila had recently discovered a love for fantasy stories. I was wandering the aisles when Emily approached me. She was the owner, a woman with kind eyes and a warm smile. Her hair was pulled back into a loose ponytail, and she wore an old sweater that looked like it had seen better days. There was nothing flashy about her, nothing loud or demanding, She was, in every sense, the opposite of Sophia. "Looking for something specific?" she asked, her voice soft but inviting. "Just browsing," I replied. That first meeting was brief, just a casual exchange about books and parenting. But something about her stuck with me. She was grounded in a way I hadn't experienced in years. Over the next few months, I found myself visiting the bookstore more often. Sometimes it was with Mason and Lila. Other times, it was just me. Emily and I started talking more about everything and nothing. She was a single parent, too, raising a teenage son who worked at the store part-time. We bonded over the challenges of parenting alone, the sleepless nights, and the small victories that kept us going. I wasn't looking for a relationship. After everything with Sophia, the idea of letting someone new into my life felt impossible. But Emily wasn't trying to force her way in. She was just there, steady, patient, and kind. It took a long time for me to trust her, not because she gave me any reason to doubt her, but because I was afraid of what it might mean if I did. I didn't want to risk my kids getting hurt again. When I finally introduced Emily to Mason and Lila, I made sure to take it slow. I wasn't going to let anyone walk into their lives and cause more upheaval. Emily understood that. She didn't try to be their mom or replace Sophia in any way. She simply got to know them at their own pace. Mason was cautious at first, watching her carefully as if trying to figure out her intentions. Lila was more open, but still hesitant. Emily never pushed, never overstepped. She let them come to her, and eventually, they did. By the time we officially started dating, Mason and Lila adored her. It wasn't just her kindness or her patience. It was the way she made us all feel like we could be ourselves. With Emily, there were no expectations, no demands. She fit into our lives without trying to change who we were. In 2020, 3 years after Sophia left, I married Emily in a small ceremony at a park near our home. It was nothing fancy, just close friends, family, and a potluck-style reception. Mason stood beside me as my best man, and Lila was Emily's flower girl. As I looked at Emily that day, I felt something I hadn't felt in years: peace. The life we built together wasn't perfect. It wasn't the life I had imagined when I first married Sophia, but it was real, and it was ours. Sophia's absence still lingered in small ways. There were moments when Mason or Lila would ask a question about her, moments when her shadow felt impossible to ignore. But those moments were becoming less frequent. The kids were growing, thriving, and finding happiness in the life we had created. One night, while tucking Lila into bed, she asked me, "Do you think Mom would like Emily?" I thought about it for a moment before answering. "I think Emily is the kind of person anyone would like," I said. "But what matters is that we like her and we're happy." Lila nodded, her eyes heavy with sleep. "I like her," she mumbled before drifting off. That was enough for me. Life had thrown us curveballs I never saw coming, but we were still standing. We had survived the storm, and in its place, we were building something stronger, something worth fighting for. Emily didn't just become a part of my life. She became a part of Mason and Lila's lives, too. Together, we were more than just a family piecing itself back together. We were something new, something better than what came before. And for the first time in years, I felt like the future was ours to shape. By 2021, life felt like it had settled into a rhythm. It wasn't always easy, but it was stable, and stability was a luxury I hadn't known in years. Emily and I had been married for almost a year, and Mason and Lila were thriving in ways that made me proud every single day. Mason, now 17, was focused on college applications, and Lila, 13, had thrown herself into music, spending hours at the piano. The past wasn't forgotten, but it felt distant, like an old scar that didn't hurt anymore. Then Sophia called. It happened one afternoon while I was cleaning out the garage. My phone buzzed on the workbench, and I almost ignored it. The number wasn't familiar, and I'd learned to avoid spam calls. But something made me pick up. The moment I said hello, I heard her voice. "Ryan," Sophia said, her tone sharp, as if no time had passed. "What the hell is going on?" I froze. Her voice, after all these years, still had the power to stop me in my tracks. I hadn't heard from her since she left that note on the pillow 7 years earlier. "What are you talking about?" I asked cautiously. "Our house," she snapped. "There are strangers living in it." Who are these people? Why are they in my home? It took me a second to understand what she was saying. Then it hit me. She was talking about the house we used to share, the one I'd sold years ago after the divorce. That's not our house anymore, I said, keeping my voice calm. I sold it after you left. It's been theirs for years now. There was a long pause before she spoke again. Her tone shifted from anger to indignation. You sold our house without telling me? You had no right to do that. Her words hit a nerve, but I didn't let it show. There's no our anymore, Sophia. You walked away. You left us. I had to do what was best for me and the kids. Her silence was brief. Then she sighed dramatically, like she was the victim in all of this. Fine. What's your new address? I need to come home and see my family. I actually laughed, not even trying to hide it. Sophia, we're not your family anymore. I'm remarried. The kids and I have moved on. You don't have a home here. Her voice turned icy. So you just replaced me? Is that it? You cheated on me with someone else while I was gone? The accusation floored me. Cheated? Seriously, Sophia? You left us. You abandoned me and the kids for 7 years. You don't get to throw that word around. She lost it, yelling about how I had no right to move on without her, how I had ruined her life by not waiting for her to come back. It was absurd, like she thought the world had been on pause while she lived out her fantasy. Listen, I said, cutting her off. You made your choice. You don't get to walk back into our lives and act like nothing happened. The kids and I are doing fine without you. We don't need you anymore. Her voice wavered, caught between anger and desperation. You'll regret this, she hissed before hanging up. When the call ended, I stood there for a moment, staring at my phone, trying to process what had just happened. After all this time, Sophia thought she could just waltz back into our lives as if she hadn't left us to fend for ourselves. That evening, I sat Mason and Lila down and told them about the call. I wanted to give them the choice. If they wanted to talk to her, I wouldn't stand in their way. Mason's reaction was immediate. No way, he said, shaking his head. She left us, Dad. Why would I want to talk to her now? Lila was quieter, but her feelings were just as clear. Do we have to? She asked softly. No, I said firmly. You don't have to do anything you don't want to. I could see the relief on their faces, but it also broke my heart to realize how much her absence had shaped them. Sophia wasn't their mom anymore, not in the way that mattered. She was just a stranger who'd left a void they'd learned to fill without her. I thought that would be the end of it, but I underestimated Sophia's persistence. Over the next few weeks, she called and texted relentlessly, leaving rambling voicemails about how I'd betrayed her and how she deserved to be part of our lives again. I ignored most of it, but then things escalated. She started calling while I was at work, and when I didn't answer, she'd leave messages accusing me of brainwashing the kids against her. One voicemail stood out. You can't erase me, Ryan. I'll always be their mother, and I'm coming back whether you like it or not. I filed for a restraining order after that. It wasn't a decision I made lightly, but I couldn't allow her to disrupt the life we had worked so hard to rebuild. Mason and Lila deserve peace, and so did Emily. Sophia didn't take the restraining order well. She started spreading rumors through mutual acquaintances, claiming I had stolen her family and manipulated the kids into rejecting her. She even tried to contact Emily directly, sending a string of unhinged messages accusing her of being a homewrecker. Emily showed me the texts, her expression calm but her eyes filled with concern. What do we do? She asked. We don't let her get to us, I said. She doesn't have any power here anymore. Emily nodded, and just like that, I knew I'd made the right choice in marrying her. She was steady, unshaken by Sophia's chaos. The legal threats came next. Sophia claimed our divorce wasn't valid because she hadn't been present to contest it. It was laughable. She had been notified through every legal channel, and the paperwork was airtight. But that didn't stop her from trying. Eventually, Sophia's efforts to force her way back into our lives began to fizzle out. Maybe she realized she wasn't getting anywhere, or maybe she just found someone else to blame for her problems. Whatever the reason, the calls and messages stopped, and for the first time in months, there was silence. That silence felt like freedom. Life moved on, as it always does. Mason continued to excel in school. Lila's piano playing flourished, and Emily and I found comfort in the quiet, steady love we shared. Sophia's return had threatened to shake the foundation we'd built, but instead, it only strengthened our resolve. We had survived her leaving. We could survive her return. And now, more than ever, I knew we were better off without her. Months passed after Sophia's dramatic attempt to wedge herself back into our lives. For the first time in years, it felt like the chaos was truly behind us. I could breathe again. The silence she left in her wake wasn't just peaceful. It was a confirmation that my family had moved on. Life had settled into something steady. Mason was preparing for his senior year of high school, poring over college applications and working part-time at a local coffee shop. Lila was deep into her piano practice, her talent growing with every recital. Emily was my rock, always by my side, supporting me and the kids in ways I never thought possible. I was thriving at work, finally stepping into a leadership role at the manufacturing plant after years of grinding overtime. We were financially secure for the first time in nearly a decade. I started to dream again, planning vacations and thinking about what the next chapter of our lives could look like. And then, just when I thought Sophia was nothing more than a distant memory, she showed up. It was during a formal work dinner, one of those networking events where everyone wears stiff suits and pretends to care about small talk. I had been invited as a guest of honor for a project I had led, something I was genuinely proud of. The evening was going smoothly, with polite conversations and the promise of decent food. I was in the middle of chatting with a colleague when I saw her. Sophia. At first, I thought my eyes were playing tricks on me. She was dressed to the nines, wearing a sleek black dress that screamed wealth and confidence. But it wasn't just her appearance that caught me off guard. It was the man she was with. My boss. My heart dropped into my stomach. Of all the places she could have appeared, of all the people she could have attached herself to, it had to be him. I stood frozen for a moment, unsure of what to do. Sophia spotted me almost immediately. Her face lit up with a forced smile as she grabbed my boss's arm and made her way over to me. "Ryan," she said, her voice dripping with fake enthusiasm. "What a surprise." I nodded politely, refusing to give her the reaction she was clearly fishing for. "Sophia," I said, keeping my tone neutral. She turned to my boss, still clinging to his arm. "Did you know Ryan and I used to be married?" My boss looked uncomfortable, clearly caught off guard. "No, I didn't," he said awkwardly. Sophia didn't stop there. She launched into a loud, one-sided story about our past, twisting the facts to make herself look like the victim. It was mortifying. I could feel the eyes of my colleagues on us, their curiosity palpable. I didn't engage. Instead, I excused myself, grabbed my jacket, and headed for the exit. But Sophia wasn't done. "Really, Ryan? You're just going to walk away?" she called after me, her voice loud enough to turn heads. "You think you can erase me from your life like I don't exist? I am your life." I stopped in my tracks, turning to face her. The room was silent, everyone waiting to see what I would do. "Lisa," I said calmly, "this isn't the time or place. You need to leave." She didn't back down. She started ranting about how I had ruined her life, stolen her family, and how I owed her everything. It was embarrassing, but I refused to stoop to her level. I simply shook my head, turned around, and walked out of the room. When I got home, Emily was waiting for me. She could tell something had happened the moment I walked through the door. "Sophia showed up," I said, dropping my jacket onto the couch. Emily raised an eyebrow. "At your work dinner?" "With my boss," I added, unable to hide the frustration in my voice. She let out a short laugh, shaking her head. "Sounds like she hasn't changed a bit." "Nope," I said, sitting down beside her. "But I have." That realization hit me harder than I expected. The old me would have been furious, embarrassed, maybe even shaken by her antics. But this version of me, the one who had rebuilt his life from the ground up, felt nothing but pity for her. Sophia's return wasn't a disruption anymore. It was a reminder of how far I had come. The next morning, I sat Mason and Lila down and told them what had happened. They listened quietly, their expressions a mix of curiosity and disbelief. "Do you think she's going to try to come back again?" Mason asked, his voice calm but firm. "I don't know," I admitted. "But it doesn't matter. She doesn't have any power over us anymore. Lila nodded, her face thoughtful. We're happy now, she said simply. I don't want her to ruin that. She won't, I promised them. And she didn't. Sophia's attempt to reinsert herself into our lives fizzled out quickly. She didn't show up at the house, didn't call or text. Maybe she realized she couldn't force her way back, or maybe she found someone else to focus on. Either way, the silence returned, and this time, it felt permanent. The life I had built with Emily and the kids wasn't just surviving, it was thriving. Mason graduated high school with honors and accepted a scholarship to a university out of state. Lila's piano playing earned her a spot in a local competition, and she beamed with pride when she performed in front of a packed auditorium. Emily and I found joy in the little things: weekend hikes, lazy mornings with coffee, and watching the kids grow into incredible young people. Sophia's return was a blip on the radar, a passing storm that left no damage in its wake. She was part of my past, but my future belonged to the people who stood by me through the hardest times. Looking back, I realized that Sophia's decision to leave all those years ago was the best thing she could have done for us. It hurt like hell at the time, but it forced me to become the man I am today, a man I'm proud of. The story didn't end the way I thought it would when we said our vows at 19, but that's okay. Life has a way of leading you to exactly where you're meant to be, even if the path is rough and unexpected. And right now, I'm exactly where I'm meant to be.